Today's hearing is really simple. It's about children. It's about children who are being exploited. It's about children it's about children whose abuse has been recorded, and the images of whose is still available, still online, still circulating right now as we sit here all around the globe. These are children whom our government could identify and rescue if we had the will and the resources to do it. And the hearing today is about identifying what resources we need in order to rescue these children who have been and whose abuse is in many cases sadly ongoing. You know, there's nothing new, I'm sad to say, about child, but there is something new about the scale of its distribution. Today, hundreds of thousands of children remain unidentified in global law enforcement databases. These are databases filled with images of children who are bound, and yet in thousands upon thousands of cases, we don't know who these children are. We don't know where they are. We don't know where their abusers are. These are active crime scenes. These images are, in many cases, are still at large. In some cases, the abuse is still ongoing. What we lack is sufficient capacity to identify the victims and to get to them. Several years ago, Tim Tebow, who's perhaps better known for his efforts on the gridiron, took up a new challenge. He partnered with the Department of Homeland Security to launch a program called Operation Renewed Hope. Tim is here today to tell us more about Operation Renewed Hope. What it did in summary is expand law enforcement's analytical ability by hiring forensic review experts and investigators dedicated to reviewing these digital images, identify victims, identify perpetrators, and then generate actionable leads for law enforcement. Operation Renewed Hope has shown something very simple. When we add analysts, when we surge forensic capacity, when we prioritize identification, we can find the kids. We can rescue the kids, and we can stop abuse. I would think the lesson from that is pretty obvious. If temporary surges can identify victims, a permanent commitment would save exponentially more. If we're serious about protecting children, none of this should be controversial. But victim identification is only one side of the crisis. We also face an explosion of online child material. More than 226 million reports have been made to the cyber tip line. 226 million. Perpetrators share this material across all of the digital platforms. You know them: Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, all of them. But the online platforms are not required to detect child material. They are not required to remove that material. They are not required to provide complete information that would help law enforcement find missing children, exploited children. Instead, the platforms get to profit off of the clicks that child generates. And survivors are forced to repeatedly beg the platforms to take down images, often their own images, of kind of like a game of digital whack-a-mole that just goes on and on and on. And now artificial intelligence adds an entirely new dimension where older and existing images can be regenerated and repurposed, and the starts all over again. We're going to hear today from a mother whose daughter's images are still circulating after 20 years. 20 years later, they're still in mass circulation. We're going to hear from those working to identify the hundreds of thousands of children who remain unnamed in global databases. We'll hear about how traffickers recruit vulnerable youth and how our systems too often fail to intervene. But I want to emphasize this hearing is not about symbolism, it's about action, it's about accountability, and it's about whether the United States Congress and the United States government writ large will match the scale of the crisis with the scale of a response. What we cannot say is that we didn't know. What we cannot say is that the images don't exist. What we cannot say is that the victims don't exist. They do. The victims are there, the images are there, and we know that we're there. So the question before us is, will we act? I hope the answer to that after today's hearing will be yes.
Good morning, Chairman Hawley, Ranking Member Durbin, distinguished members of the committee. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor and really a privilege and humbling to be here with all of you, Miss Julia, Miss Stacia, Yasmin, and Miss Jane. It really is humbling and feel unworthy to be sitting beside all of you. So thank you so much for your work. As you mentioned, I'm so blessed to be a part of the Tim Tebow Foundation, and we exist to bring faith, hope, and love to those needing a brighter day in their darkest hour of need. But to really sum it up, it's to fight for people that can't fight for themselves. And I believe that's exactly why we're here today. Several years ago, we were finishing a leadership meeting, and I looked at Camille, our VP of Anti-Human Trafficking and Child Exploitation, and she had a very sober look on her face. And I said, Camille, what is it? What's breaking your heart? And she wrote down the number 20,000. And I said, Camille, 20,000 what? And she said, 20,000 boys and girls. That's the best guess of what law enforcement can see in images, but yet they're categorized as unknown, unidentified. So that led us to a meeting in Lyon, France with HSI, FBI, Interpol, Europol, NICMIC, Google, ONIMI, and 18 other countries to find out, okay, what actually is the closest thing to the truth? And it wasn't 20,000. It was 57,000 boys and girls in the ICSA database that have yet to be identified. And that led us to Renewed Hope 1, 2, and 3, which identified over 1,100 boys and girls, and over 550 of them have been safeguarded so far. And right now, 30 minutes away at C3, the Cyber Crime Center, which is just so many of the best investigators and agents that America has to offer. They really are incredible. We just came from there, and I just want to thank them because they are the tip of the spear and the best of the best. And right now, the biggest operation ever in the fight against child exploitation is taking place with 30 countries, 34 agencies, 94 investigators and victim identification specialists, and hopefully it will be one of the biggest operations ever in history. But the problem is that the number now is not 57,000. With all of the work that all of these people and amazing law enforcement agents and nonprofit NGOs are doing all around the world, the number is not 57,000 like we said 2 years ago. It's over 89,000. We are losing the battle and we are losing the war, and boys and girls are suffering for it. And to give you an idea of the scope of what's happening in America, there's a red dot map right over there over my right shoulder, and that's just a 6-month screenshot of the US. And every red dot that is on there is someone that is downloading, sharing, or distributing child images, almost all under the age of 12. And there's over 330 of them just in that 6-month screenshot. And we know that 55 to 85% of them are also hands-on offenders, and we know that your average offender has 13 victims in their lifetime. The scale of harm right here in America is, to a certain extent, hard to comprehend. But that's why we're here. And when you knock down one of those doors, you also have no idea how many boys and girls you're going to find. From Operation Renewed Hope 1, one of the doors that was knocked down, when they went in and seized his computer, they found that he also had 30 other boys and girls in that neighborhood. So there's a lot of work to do. And Ranking Member Durman, you're right, we have to be able to act. A little over a year ago, I was at one of our protection centers, and a protection center has extra security because there's still a bounty and a price on these girls and young women's lives. And I was walking through the counseling rooms, and I walk up to one of the counseling rooms, and it's this beautiful couch, and it's got teddy bears and toys and children's books in it. And right behind the couch, there's a window. And right behind the window is the wall, and it's the edge of the protection center. I look up to the top of the wall, and it's the razor wire all the way around the top. And I'm just looking at this picture, and it's a surreal picture because inside, those girls are going to be cherished and loved and protected and cared for. But on the outside, they went through an earthly form of hell. And I'm standing there looking at this picture, and one of our team members comes and whispers in my ear as I'm looking at this picture. And he said, man, isn't it such a thin line between and treasured? And he was right. It is a thin line between and treasured. And you are that thin line. And all of you are that thin line. But we have to have more people on that line, and we have to do a whole lot more, and we have to do it faster. Because every day we wait, they're suffering, they're crying, and I believe right now many of them are praying that we would respond. But how are we really going to respond? Because I ultimately also believe that this is what we're called to do. And what is calling me, and in my opinion, the best definition is an urgent and divine invitation to accept responsibility for a particular task. But the question is, will we actually accept the responsibility of caring for these boys and girls and truly protecting them, or are we just going to continue to talk about it? Because there's so much we can do, but the question is, will we? Thank you for having me, and thank you for letting me be a part.
Could you just briefly describe for us the mission of the Tim Tebow Foundation?
To sum it up would be to fight for people that can't fight for themselves in their darkest hour of need. And we want to try to do that imperfectly, but in any and every way that we can. So if that's supporting law enforcement, if it's long-term restoration, we're fortunate to, with our partners, have 52 safe homes and 19 more in progress. If it's whatever it is, that's our calling, is to care for the MVP. I spent way too much of my life chasing a less important MVP of most valuable player, and I want to spend the rest of my life chasing the most vulnerable people, because I know that one means a whole lot more to our God.
What inspired you to start the foundation?
I met a boy in the jungles of the Philippines when I was 15 years old who was born with his feet on backwards, and because of that, he was viewed as less than insignificant and cursed, and they treated him as a throwaway. But I knew he wasn't a throwaway, but I also knew that God was breaking my heart and saying, yeah, but what are you going to do about it? How valuable is he going to actually be to you? Because what do we do with things that we say all life has value, but when we say something has value or valuable, what do we do with our valuables? We treasure them, we protect them, we care for them. How come so often we very rarely do that for life and life abundantly? And so that's what we are called to do, is to care for life so that life can be abundant, and so that we can truly try to bring faith, hope, and love to those needing a brighter day in their darkest hour of need. And there's a lot of people in their darkest hour of need right now.
Let me ask you about some folks who are in a dark hour of need. I've got a chart that I think will come over my shoulder here. This is showing the increase in the production of child material just in the United States online. You can see this dramatic increase from 2001 to 2023. This is numbers, I think, from NCMEC. In 2023 alone, there was 104,370,572 separate images and videos of suspected child abuse reported in the United States of America. You mentioned in your opening statement a few minutes ago that when you first began working in the space of child trafficking, trying to rescue trafficked children, you were told that there were about 20,000 children whose images had not been identified, who we had the images of the kid, but we didn't know who they were. In fact, as you learned, given how many images of exploitation there are out there, it's a lot more kids than 20,000, isn't it? Like, what's the rough estimate today of how many kids are unidentified?
Well, it's really hard to know. What I was going on was strictly just the ICSA database, and in that, we know that there are 89,000 series right now, but that's just one database. And so one of the things that we would ask and plead this committee to work on is an international treaty of getting all of the different databases to work together to deconflict, so we actually get a ground truth on what the number is, because HSI, FBI, CAID, Australia, and Canada all have different databases as well as Interpol. Could we get those databases to work together? And I know there's some sensitive, because it's a crime scene in every single one, so we got to be sensitive with that. But at the same point, we could work together to truly understand the real number of how many boys and girls are waiting to be identified and how many boys and girls are suffering in the middle of that still right now.
Let's have a look here at what just the Interpol images show, what we're looking at in terms of content of unidentified exploited children by the numbers. 84% of the images were of actual, not simulated, but actual. 47% of the NCMEC images contained extreme abuse, including actual rape. 60% of unidentified victims are under 12. 60%. 65% of unidentified victims are girls. And almost 5% of the images were infants. These are just extraordinary numbers that give a sense of the scope of the epidemic that we're dealing with here. Let me put up another poster that you reference and ask you to explain what it is. It's a diagram of the United States, a map of the United States with these pinpoints all over it. Can you tell us what this image depicts?
Yeah, that's a DOJ database, and every one of those red dot maps is a unique IP address that is downloaded, shared, or distributing child rape images, almost all under the age of 12. And that's just a 6-month screenshot of it, and there are over 338,000 on there. And if you could also look, there's blue dots on there. You can't really see them, but the blue ones are the ones that are under investigation.
In a sea of red.
Isn't that a problem of what we're talking about?
It's unbelievable. It's overwhelming. So let me ask you, against all of this backdrop, Tell us about Operation Renewed Hope, what it is, how it works to help kids who are unidentified, who are trapped in abuse. What does Operation Renewed Hope do?
Well, it does a few things. It's bringing together law enforcement and victim identification specialists from all over the world to work together in the same room with the best technology and the best training. And it's amazing what happens when you do that, to be able to see the results. Operation Renewed Hope 1 had 316 identifications. The next one, Renewed Hope 2, had 417 identifications. Renewed Hope 3 had 387 identifications. And with all of that, over 550 of the boys and girls have been safeguarded. And we're praying that Operation Renewed Hope 4 blows the first 3 away.
So it's a surge of resources, forensic analysis, tools for victim identification. It's a surge of resources for a few weeks. Is that right?
2-week sprint. Yes.
2-week sprint. So just imagine what might be possible if instead of a 2-week sprint, we made it permanent. If Congress permanently surged resources toward victim identification.
Well, I think to back up for just a second, a few things that are important to mention is at C3, the Cybercrime Center, who is the best of the best in this space, there are 10 victim identification specialists. And one of the things that we are asking Congress is to authorize so that they can hire more. That's one of the things the Renewed Hope Act does, is it allows them to hire 200 positions. 70 of them will be at C3 and 130 of them will be in the field. So imagine our chance of fighting back against this evil if we go from 10 to 200. We have much better odds. Could you imagine if any business or any area in life, and we would say, you got at least 89,000 boys and girls that you have to identify, and hey, here's 10 people that are amazing, and they're the best, and I love them very much. But it's 10 people's job to do that. In what area do we think we would be successful with those odds and those numbers? And that's one of the things that Renewed Hope Act changes. And then I would say another thing is I would ask that we would fully fund the ICACs, so that the ICACs could have all their funding, because they do amazing work in so many of the states and localities and districts around America that do this work as well. And so I think both of those would be 2 big asks that would make a radical difference.
There's 2 tremendous solutions right there.
Mr. Tebow, I was remembering way back zone when you were one of the speakers at the National Prayer Breakfast, and I was co-chairing it with Johnny Isaacson. Do you remember that?
Yes.
You're under oath.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. You did a nice job. Thank you.
Thank
Seems
you.
like a simpler time. I believe that we need, like you do, to give law enforcement resources to quickly identify victims of human trafficking, because the faster a victim can be identified, the faster they can be helped. The Renewed Hope Act seeks to do that. Could you talk about why training is an important part of that act, training of law enforcement?
Because it is very complicated, and unfortunately, those with the goal to do evil many times work better than those with the goal to do good. And they coach one another on how best to avoid detection. We could show you manuals. We could show you chats of them going back and forth of how you can cover up blood, how you don't have to make blood, how your wife doesn't have to find out, over and over and over again, of how they are working together, many times better than the people that are striving for good. And I think training is so important, because a lot of these cases are very complicated. We could tell you so many different stories of, one of the stories from an incredible investigator over a young girl crying, turned down the meta volume from it to be able to hear a bird chirp in the background, and then they went to Cornell Labs to be able to get a specialist to be able to understand where would this type of bird have been at this spot. And ultimately, long story made a lot shorter, they were able to safeguard that boy, because it's so specialized and it's so hard. And that's why the training, especially for victim identification specialists, is so important.
I want you to talk for just a moment about how social media is actually facilitating the work of these predators and these groomers that are going after our children.
Well, thank you, Senator Blackburn. I think, if you just look at in 2024 alone, the FBI received 55,000 sextortion reports. Over 40 suicides because of it. So much of this is being done on social media, and especially when it comes to sextortion, a lot of it is being done to young boys that are especially...
Now, that is primarily those sites like LookMaxing, and aren't these kind of the gateways for a lot of these?
It's happening on almost all social media.
On all of them?
Yes, ma'am. But I think one of the things that has to be changed is there is a lot, you look at Nigeria, the Ivory Coast, and there I believe it was 2024 as well, that Meta took down 74,000 accounts in Nigeria alone. Because they were trying to sextort boys and girls right here in America. So this is a huge problem that is not being talked about enough, and they are looking for the vulnerability to lure a boy or girl, getting a photo from them and then holding them hostage to it. And it especially for young boys that have a platform in high school that are maybe an athlete or something like that, because they feel like they have more to lose, although anybody suffering is terrible. And so they're kind of isolating them out more so than the rest because they have a platform and they don't want to lose it. And it's leading to a lot of boys and girls that are suffering because of it.
Ms. Doe, can I just come back to you and ask just a bit more about your story? When investigators first showed you the pictures of your daughter and the abuse that your ex-husband had perpetrated on your daughter, did you understand then that those pictures had been shared and were circulating wildly, wildly and widely out in the world? I mean, what was that like?
Well, the whole thing, I was taken by surprise when they first came to us and told me what was happening. I was confused. I didn't understand when, where, how. But in the end, after they explained to me, yes, sadly, I understood that they were circulated and her abuse is worldwide.
Let me ask you this. Are images, that was 20 years ago, approximately?
5 years ago.
25 years ago. Are images of your daughter still online?
They're still online. They've made movies from her images. They've taken a culmination of the images and created a montage, like you go to a wedding or another affair, and that's how they're played now. They change hashtags. They'll change something in the color of the shirt. They'll add a flower. They'll add a bunny to the picture, so it makes it harder to identify the picture because you're changing the hashtag of the picture. So it's a different format that they have to look for. So.
Have you had any experience with the social media platforms where this material often circulates? And this is child material. Have you worked with them? Have you asked them to take down your daughter's pictures? What's your experience with them been like?
I've been fighting since day one. That's all I do. I contact people. I hound people down. I said, if we were famous, if she was a celebrity, those pictures would be down. I said, she's not famous. She's famous to me, but evidently not famous enough to the world unless people here do something about it. I've asked, I've hired lawyers. I've done it personally, asking, sir. I have had a fight with Google about it, saying for the safety of my child, you have to get these images off. I said, her pictures of her abuse are out there. People know. We have a neighbor at one point who was found with who was caught with her images online. We were notified by the Department of Justice. This pervert lived blocks away from us. We didn't know him until I got the notification that he had her images. I said, it's imperative that you get these things off the computer. And what did they tell me? I have to contact the webmaster and speak to the webmaster and have them take it down. But in order for me to contact the webmaster, I have to give him my name, my phone number, my address. So why don't I just give him my child?
Why do you think these social media companies aren't more proactive in taking down this material?
Oh, because they're making money off of it. They're profiting. That's what the bottom line is with everything, profit.
Yeah, profit. Here, 26 years later, 6 years later, your daughter's material is still online, and they're making money on it, the social media companies, and that's the bottom line.
Absolutely.
And we all know what it really is. You know, this is why I think it is so imperative that the full Senate take up and pass the legislation that this committee passed unanimously, which would allow you and your daughter to get into court and to sue any company that knows or should know that your daughter's images are on their platform and they won't take it down. As you said, why should you have to chase anybody? Why should you be the one who has to police it? You shouldn't have to. They know they should do it. They're evading accountability because they make money on it. And I just want to say again to the big tech companies, no amount of profit justifies destroying people's lives. And that's what they're doing, destroying your daughter's life, destroying other people's lives because it makes them money. And it's time that the United States Senate showed a little independence from these tech companies and actually did something about it. So I just renew again my call to the Senate, to my colleagues, for heaven's sake, stop taking big tech's money, number one, and number two, pass this bill and give victims rights to get into court and to protect themselves. Mr. Tebow, I just want to put a bow on what we were talking about so that people understand clearly 100% what needs to happen here, thinking about the tens of, probably hundreds of thousands of kids whose images are online but who are unidentified. What Congress could do right now is we could pass legislation that would fully fund new victim identification specialists, analysts on a permanent basis into the Department of Homeland Security and wherever else they might be helpful. We could do that on a permanent basis, and that would have a tremendous effect in identifying these kids, rescuing these kids, and bringing their perpetrators, their abusers to justice. Have I got that right?
Absolutely.
What else do we need to understand about what we need to do right now in order to help these kids?
I think to add on to what Ms. Jane was saying, one of the things that we would love is for the Supreme Court to hear the Doe versus Twitter case. And we are submitting an amicus brief on behalf of the 2 boys who were sextorted on Snapchat and then distributed on Twitter. That would be pretty helpful as well.
Well, that'd be fantastic. That would be fantastic. And since you opened that door, I'll just say that it's time for Congress to pass legislation that removes the Section 230 shield that prevents these companies from ever being held accountable. These companies are so outrageous. You know, they're just outrageous. On the one hand, they claim, well, we're not publishers, therefore we can't be held accountable. And then they turn around and say, well, we're publishers, and therefore we have First Amendment immunity. That's just absurd. There's no company or corporation in America other than the social media companies who are completely and totally shielded from any kind of liability no matter what they do. You know, if your car blows up, you can sue the car maker. And guess what? When you do, the cars work a whole lot better. These social media companies, Ms. Doe, no victim in here today, not a one of you, can get into court against these social media companies. That is just wrong. And I'll tell you why it is. It's because the amount of money that flows to this body from those companies keeps the courtroom door shut for you. We need to open it up, and we need to say that you're more important than any amount of money. The Senate has the chance to do that.